everyone. Welcome to NewAscpet SALON. I'm your host, Yunxiu Cai. Today we have a very special guest who is going to perform in our concert on December 26th at National Concert Hall. And this concert, we're bringing a very special program. You know, when it comes to the end of the year and the beginning of next year or the new year, we always celebrate this festive season with a special program with two piano concerti or two concerti. And this idea is actually generated from the guest we have today. So we're going to perform on 26 December with Shostakovich, two concerti, and Festive Overture and the Shostakovich Symphony 1. Let's welcome our special and also my dear friend Boris Giltburg.
Hi Yunxiu, hi, very happy to be here.
Boris, I would like to, since we know each other for quite some time, right? Would you like to share with our audience about how we started this special project?
Absolutely. Well, it comes in a line of projects like this that we've been doing for several years now. We did Prokofiev 3 and Rachmaninoff 2 in one concert. Then we did Rachmaninoff 3 and Rachmaninoff 4 in one concert. And now the idea is to continue with the tradition, and this time it will be two concerti by the same composer, Shostakovich. So that's how the idea came about. And I think even though it is two concertos by one composer, they are so different from each other that it still in a way will almost feel like two concertos from two different worlds, let's say. So even though the language is a little bit, it has the same DNA, but the Shostakovich of Concerto Number 1 and Concerto Number 2 is two very different Shostakoviches. There's also almost, I think, a 25 or 26 years difference between them, and a lot has happened both to Shostakovich personally in that time and to the world in which he was living, and I think this is all reflected in the music. So I think there's still a lot of variety, even though it's the same composer.
Yeah, I remember this special project when we talked about doing two concerti in one night. It was 2023, right? Yeah, 2023.
I think so.
Yeah, after the pandemic, and you told me that you would like very much to play. So that's why we had two concerti in one night, right?
Absolutely, and I love this format. And until last week, Taiwan was the only place where I've ever done that. But last week I also played a concert with actually the same combination, Prokofiev 3 and Rachmaninoff 2 in London. So now I also have a bit of experience doing that outside of Taiwan, but Taiwan stays the place where I did it for the first time, and still stays the place where I'm doing it regularly. So it still remains a very special occasion.
So this program is, we celebrate Shostakovich's anniversary of 50 years. Would you like to share a little bit about this insight?
Yes, absolutely. So Shostakovich for me is the most fascinating figure in classical music of the 20th century as a person. There are many very interesting characters in music in the 20th century, but he is the one that I maybe know best through his letters and everything I could find that was related to him. I read a lot about him, and for me his life, his relationship with the regime, with Stalin, and how that happened in that period of time and how that was reflected in his music makes him, as I said, maybe the most interesting musical character for me in that period. And even though it's just, we'll say, 50 years since his death, but it feels such a huge period because I think the world has also in those 50 years changed to an unrecognizable level. So in a way, Shostakovich, even though he's modern and contemporary and remains so, but also he already belongs to this great tradition of classical music and past composers. So he has this duality of someone who is fresh and relevant to today, but also one that who is already, has been tested by time and withstood the test of time without any doubt. And he's a composer that I engaged with a lot, not just playing both concerti, all of his chamber music, but also arranging some of his string quartets for solo piano. So I was greedy, and for me, the string quartets and the symphonies are maybe the best that he has created. And of course the symphonies, they belong to a big symphonic orchestra and you can't really grab that. But the string quartets, some of them work surprisingly well on the piano. So I arranged number 8, I arranged number 3, I arranged the waltz from number 2. And it's because I had this hunger and this real need to, or want or desire to have access to that Shostakovich. And that is also the kind of absolutely top tier Shostakovich that we also find in both piano concertos.
So would you like to also share with the audience about these two concerti, because you said the year of composition is actually 25 or 26 difference, right? And we know the first concerto was composed for piano and trumpet, and the second one is for son.
So actually, at first, the role of the trumpet was much bigger. And it was supposed to be, I think at some point it was supposed to be a trumpet concerto, and finally it became a piano and trumpet concerto. So I'd say, though, that the role of the trumpet is absolutely crucial. The concerto does not work without the trumpet, and this is maybe one of the coolest things about the concerto, because it's a combination that you do not expect. And of course, the orchestra is strings only. So you really have these three very different sound worlds. The trumpet, glorious blaze of sound, with a lot of humor, a lot of cheek, and then the piano, which covers a lot of ground from, we will talk in a second about the style of the music, but the piano has a large variety of roles to play in the concerto, and then the strings that go almost from a kind of Baroque concerto accompaniment to something which is decidedly very, very modern. And it's one of the most eclectic compositions of Shostakovich's output. He quotes from everything and everybody. There are Haydn quotations, Beethoven quotations. He was once asked to explain the concerto, and he said, the only way for me to explain the concerto is by playing the concerto. Meaning, well, he said, the only answer I can give will use the same means as the means which I used to write the music. Meaning, listen to the music, that's the only explanation I can give. Because on paper, it should not work. It's a kind of patchwork of different styles, different quotations, forms, structures. Yet, because it is Shostakovich's genius, that instead of this being a pastiche, instead of this being some kind of cheap imitation of everything, instead it becomes a pure work of art, which is pure Shostakovich from beginning till end. And it just works. And I remember as a kid, I fell in love with that concerto way before I knew concerto number 2. So it has this coolness factor, which appeals to everyone, I think, because it has catchy melodies, it has catchy rhythms, it has a lot of surprises, moments where you're not expecting things to happen the way they happen. He, of course, played it himself. We have a recording of him playing it himself. And I think one of the important things to note that this was Shostakovich before a very important event of his life, which was the attack by Stalin and Stalin's regime on him after the premiere of the opera Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. And this is really a watershed moment in Shostakovich's life. Before that, he was, I cannot overstate how famous and popular he was. And not just in the Soviet Union. That opera, Lady Macbeth, it had premieres all around the world just within 2 years. He was being celebrated almost like a modern-day Wagner. There was a craze of adoration for Shostakovich, and he felt that he was on top of the world. And the first concerto comes from that period when he felt at the top of his powers, where he could do whatever he wanted, take any approach to music, take any approach to life. And then this attack came, and his life basically changed overnight. Because these attacks were... So the attack was an anonymous article in the Pravda, which was the official paper of the party. And even though it was not signed, we believe that it was at least drafted by Stalin himself, who saw the performance of Lady Macbeth and for many reasons hated it. And from that point on, Shostakovich's life changed and his music changed. This kind of carefree approach to life and music that we still feel in the first concerto has completely disappeared. His next big piece after that horrible criticism, and I say horrible criticism because it wasn't just like today that you receive a bad review in the paper, you're sad, it's annoying, it's frustrating, but it's a review in the paper. But at the time, an article like that in the official newspaper could lead to your work being prohibited from performance, and in some very extreme cases it could lead to being imprisoned and or something worse, which happened, for example, to Meyerhold, the theater director, and quite a few others. So it was not a small matter, this kind of destructive criticism. So he was supposed to give the premiere of the Fourth Symphony then, but he stopped that. He pulled the symphony from the concert, and he took several years to think of what to do. And then his musical reply, was the Fifth Symphony, which of course we know today is one of his greatest masterpieces. But I think what is really important, if we look at Shostakovich's life, is how different the Fifth Symphony is from anything he's written before. The Fifth Symphony is a highly structured, controlled work. We'll be playing the First Symphony in our concert, and you can hear again the irreverence, the feeling that he can do whatever, the experimentation, basically a kind of free spirit with no boundaries, with no control. And in most cases it worked really well. In some cases he had also pieces from late 20s, early 30s that didn't quite work as well because of this idea that he could do anything. The Fifth Symphony is the antithesis of all of that. It is, you can feel him tightening all the bolts and nuts and imposing this rigid, controlled vision and structure on a piece. And in a way, everything he's written since and for the rest of his life was in that world. So, and of course, many of the works that we think today as his greatest masterpieces, not only the Fifth Symphony, but also the War Symphonies and the Violin Concerto, the Second Piano Concerto, the String Quartets, they all come from that Shostakovich after the attack. So, it's a question of theoretical history. What would have happened if that attack in 1936 did not come? He would have written some completely different music. So we would have gained something that we don't have today, but we would have lost also all the masterpieces that we do have from his, let's say, the second half of his life. So the second concerto is very firmly in that second part of his life. It is structured. It is one of the clearest structures I know in any of Shostakovich's works. As you say, he wrote it for his son. His son, Maxim, was graduating from the conservatory, and the idea was that he would perform this concerto at his graduation. But I think, the piece has definite power way beyond just being a family present to his son. It is absolutely wonderful music. It is Shostakovich, which is much lighter, much more light-hearted than in many of his other pieces from that period. But of course, this being Shostakovich, we also get in the first movement some real anger and darkness and almost rage. But again, everything is controlled. And even to the point that in terms of tempos, the first and third movement, there is not a single change of tempo. And I often say that this is one of the easiest concertos to put together with the orchestra. Because in a way, once you decide on the tempo, that's it. It's just one tempo throughout. There are no changes. Basically, it just goes. And again, this for me is this reflection of Shostakovich in his clear, structured life. And then, of course, within the structure, he finds cool things to do. So, like in the third movement of the second concerto, you have a section which is in 7/8, which is a very jazzy, quirky meter. You know, Dave Brubeck used it in some of his compositions. So it's this kind of slightly unexpected meter in classical music, but he makes it work. And for me, the highlight of the second concerto is the second movement, because this is a very rare moment of Shostakovich without a mask. You know, when I spoke about him imposing this structure on his music after the attack, it was also him putting an emotional mask. And in all the pieces that he wrote later, or almost all of them, you can never know what he really thinks. And I think it was done on purpose. Even the Fifth Symphony, you know, the end of the Fifth Symphony finale, is it a triumph or is it people screaming because they're being strangled? We don't know. And it can be interpreted in both ways and it would work. And I really think that it was done on purpose, that all of his pieces were written in such a way after the attack that the party could interpret them as something which praises the life in the Soviet Union, adheres to the, you know, to the edicts of social realism, which is the aesthetical school that everybody was supposed to follow, when things were bright and happy, and if there was some sadness, in the end there would be victory over that sadness or challenge and everything would be fine. And yeah, so in his music he sort of walked a very narrow line between music, because he did not want to write music which would be pure, you know, pure Soviet stuff. So he still had his vision, but he had to squeeze it in such a way that it could have been interpreted as reflecting the glory and happiness of Soviet life. So in that way of looking, the second movement of the second concerto is a very rare moment where I think we see him without that mask, because it's just genuine sadness, which is so deep and so inescapable. And I mean, yes, he escapes it in the third movement, but the second movement on its own, this C minor, it's so simple, and because of this, so heartbreaking. And it has a beautiful structure that first the strings play music in C minor, and then the piano comes in C major. And the strings are mostly in the low register, so it's like it has this rich glow, like an oil painting. And then the piano comes up quite high on the keyboard and in C major, and it's like a moment of light, maybe not sunlight but maybe moonlight, that the clouds have parted and we see the stars and we see the moon, and it's a moment of hope and maybe solace. But then in the reprise, the same music comes back in minor, and for me it's the most heartbreaking moment of all. And because it's like we had this ray of light and it's gone. And in performance it's really important not to overdo this moment, just to let it happen normally, because the music is already emotionally so powerful that anything we add will just make it sentimental, and that's the opposite of what it has to be. So if you like, it has to be, I think, molto semplice, very simple, and then it works. And then the movement just ends with this deeply, profoundly sad C minor. And then, of course, the music takes us out of it, because then the finale comes and it's irreverent and wonderful and sunny. But that second movement is one of the most special things by Shostakovich that I've ever played.
Speaking to Shostakovich, his genius that you can have, one can take his own interpretation, I guess. For Soviet Union, for the party, they can take whatever they want to hear, and for the audience, they can also take whatever they want to, interpret it. And what's your personal connection to Shostakovich? Because you mentioned so many times in interviews or in your videos that you have your own personal connection with Shostakovich. So would you like to share a little bit?
Absolutely. So, as I said before, I find something magnetic in his character. And for me, it's not just his music, but his letters as well. Not the books about him, not testimony, which we don't know if it's true or not, but the letters that we know that were written by him. And you hear his voice through the letters. And it just gives you such a direct access to him, to his thoughts, because especially with his very close friends, he really wrote some very personal things. And how he never took himself seriously. There's always this kind of wry self-humor. So he has this sort of like half smile, which is half happy, half bitter, looking at himself and at his life. And it's just, there's this something in his relationship with the regime, with Stalin, in how he navigated those very dangerous grounds. So that, combined with the music itself, is my personal connection. So it's just, I just want to play as much of him as I can. And in a way, I feel kind of dissatisfied with his solo piano music a little bit, because for me, as I said, the greatest Shostakovich is the Shostakovich of the symphonies and the 15 string quartets. 15 symphonies and 15 string quartets, like two monumental pillars that support his output. And then very close to that are the concerti and the chamber music, and I played everything I could. And even though he himself was a pianist, and apparently quite a decent pianist, his solo piano music is not quite, I would say, not quite as magnificent as the symphony, string quartets, chamber music, and concertos. We have two sonatas. They're lovely. They're interesting, quirky. The first one is very avant-garde. The second is a bit more traditional. And we have, of course, the 24 preludes and fugues, of which several are masterpieces, but not maybe the entire cycle. So that's why I'm so envious of the string quartets, that they have this access to this incredible Shostakovich. So there's something in his music that speaks to me in a very direct way. I understand it very clearly without needing to think or analyze it, just on a instinctive gut feeling. And that's something which I had since I was a kid. I was playing both concertos since my early teens, and so that love affair started very, very early. And I think that's one of the really cool things about Shostakovich. Even though he could be very complex, he is also often extremely accessible. And that's a very difficult thing to do, to write great music which is also very accessible to a lot of people. And, I also immensely love Prokofiev. But a key difference between Shostakovich and Prokofiev, the greatest melodies of Prokofiev, the opening of the Fifth Symphony, we all think it's a great melody, but how many of us can sing it? exactly what's happening there. Or the Eighth Sonata, another one of his great, amazingly shaped melodies, but no one can sing it or it's very difficult to sing. Whereas Shostakovich had this gift of writing hits. He would write melodies, of which, of course, the biggest example is Waltz from Suite Number 2. He just knew how to write a melody which would be as catchy as any pop song. So he knew how to put the hook in, and he just had this ability. And in the same way, often the emotions in his music, they are, I would say, almost not nuanced. They're raw, strong, basic emotions that we can often put even labels on. This is fear, and this is rage, and this is a kind of visceral hope which is more intense than anything we experienced. So they're not, often when I speak about late Beethoven, I say also, I cannot describe the emotions. The only way to describe the emotions there is to listen to the music, because they're so complex and so multi-layered, and every bar is something different. Whereas in Shostakovich, very often, it's like a punch in the stomach. He takes these emotions, intensifies them, and finds music which would then throw them back at the listeners with such force that we just shake from the power of this impact. And this is something which is very satisfying. This is the closest we get to playing rock music or metal. Like seriously, this the same idea. When you listen to Metallica, and you feel the same visceral rage that when I played in the second concerto, the first movement, when the development starts, and you just start these double octave passages, it's the same emotion. It's just throw everything at the piano. You don't need to hold back, and this is again, it's really satisfying. You don't need to be refined. You don't need to be exquisitely shaped it's just whatever you got, throw it at the piano, throw it at the music, at the audience, it will be just enough. And this is something which, that's another side of classical music, because we often think of classical music as being, the quite refined, and much of it is, but Shostakovich could also be very raw and hooligan-y, and just in the first concerto, one of the things he quotes is pub songs from Odessa, and it's that is mixed seamlessly with quotes from Beethoven and Haydn, and it just works. But it was part of his musical language. So all these things are part of my personal connection with Shostakovich.
Shostakovich absolutely know where the hearts are and where the market is, because he wrote, music for movies, or for, of course, his own composition, and for all kinds of occasions, and like the overture, the festival overture, we know that he wrote in 3 days, right?
Yeah.
For the order of the celebration. So that's how his genius shows.
Absolutely, and their stories. He has a lovely operetta called Moscow Cheremушки, which is not very known, but it's amazing music. And there was a story that he was very late in delivering the music, and then finally the director went to see him, gently tried to push him a little bit, and they had a whole conversation while Shostakovich was scribbling something on music on the paper, and he was talking, and finally said, "Well, Dmitrievich, so when do you think we could expect the music?" He said, "Well, I'm just finishing it now." So he was composing while he was having that conversation, and so there's something very pure in his genius. In a way, there's something for me that links him to Mozart and Bach. Not so much in the music, but in this ability to compose in his mind, and then just write down the piece when it's already done, the same way Mozart was was composing. And Bach, of course, the way, not just because he wrote the 24 preludes and fugues, but I think his way of thinking, always polyphonic, or very often polyphonic, and just this complexity which seems effortless, which I associate with Bach as well. So, So when we think of Beethoven and how his manuscripts are battlefields, he was really struggling to write everything, and then every completed piece is a victory of him over the struggles of composition. So in Shostakovich, I don't feel that at all. In Shostakovich, it feels as if everything just flows from his mind into his pen and onto the paper.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for this concert, you're going to work with Alexander Bloch, the conductor, and he's your good friend, right?
Yes, yeah, we did. Yeah, that's how we became friends. And I still remember our first collaboration. We did Chopin number 2. And as you might know, the accompaniment of Chopin number 2 is not the most exciting for the orchestra. And for the first time in my life, I heard Chopin 2 accompanied in a way which made the orchestral part exciting and talented and interesting and inspired. And for me, that was an eye-opening moment, because I've never heard the orchestra part done in this way. And that immediately showed me that Alexander has amazing vision. And just the way he works with an orchestra, every time we work together, it's this combination of excitement and clarity of vision, which he then communicates to the orchestra, infecting the orchestra with his excitement. Also in the symphonic works, which he conducts. So we've not done either of the Shostakovich concertos together, so I'm really looking forward to finding out what his vision is for these. And I'm sure the final interpretation will be different from anything I've done before, because it will be inspired by his vision and kind of emerge as a joint idea, joint collaboration.
And also for Taipei Symphony Orchestra, this would be your first time working together. It's also our first time in 10 years to work with Taipei Symphony Orchestra, because they are always very busy, and they had just a big success touring in Japan and Korea. Yeah, so this would be your first time working together. So before you go to the rehearsal studio and meeting new partners to make music, what would you do to prepare yourself, or what kind of expectation you have before entering?
So actually it's the same. You just prepare the music the best you can, and you should have a clarity of vision. And good orchestras can then your vision is what connects you with the orchestra. Like, I don't talk to the orchestra. I'm not a conductor, so I don't have this verbal side of communication. So the only way I can make friends with them is via playing, and of course, just by being friendly. But that's the idea, that I'm myself. I don't change based on the orchestra I'm playing with, and my approach to music making is to be as true as you can to the spirit of the work and to the letter of the work. So both to what you think the composer meant, but also to what is in the score. And I think it's a healthy approach, because then if there are questions of why something is like this, then you can say, these are my reasons, and it can be a reason of interpretation, but also it would always be based on the score. And then you just hope that you're playing in the first, because the first rehearsal, the very first thing, will play at least one movement through, and this is your chance to build the bridge immediately with the orchestra. So that's it. And also, I think, to be engaged with the orchestra, not just to look at the piano. You know, if you're accompanying a woodwind instrument, look at them. Be just in direct touch with them, the same way you would be in chamber music. So I think the orchestras really feel when you are not in your own little bubble, but you actually, then they feel that they are not accompanying you, but that you are partners. And I think for all of us to feel that they are equal partners is a much nicer feeling than just to say, okay, we're accompanying, so we're on the side, and this is the soloist. Because all these concerti that we've done, the Prokofiev, all the Rachmaninoffs, the Shostakovich, the orchestra in all of them is an equal partner. None of them would have a tiny, a lot of the material is in the orchestra, and the piano is either in dialogue or contrast with the orchestra, but it's always the two elements working together in one way or another. So that's what I was to do. Just be myself, be prepared, well prepared, and with the first playthrough that you do, try to show what you are trying to achieve, and then the connection is established.
So last question. For this special project, what would you expect to bring to our audience in Taipei?
I think the program that we have is mostly focused on the bright side of Shostakovich. It's the cool side, the exciting side, the quirky side. We don't have any, apart from the second movement, but even that is just sad. It's not horrible. We don't have any of the horror of Shostakovich in that program. And I think this is a very uplifting program. It's an energizing program. You said we do it towards the end of the year, but I think a program like this is a jolt of energy. It's like an electric current that hopefully will jump from the stage to the hall and electrify the audience. So I think that would be my idea, that people leave the hall with a smile, that they feel energized, and that they feel that they've listened to some very cool music. And I know that this is what we will be feeling on stage, because this is really cool music to play as well. And I really hope that this is what the audience will take from it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Dear Taipei audience, I'm immensely excited to be coming back to the National Concert Hall to play both Shostakovich piano concertos with the Taipei Symphony Orchestra and Alexander Bloch conducting. They are among the two coolest concertos in existence. They are electrifying, they are quirky, they're exciting, they're unlike anything else really in the piano repertoire. And also they're very different from each other, so to combine both of them in one concert is really, really cool. And I know all of us can't wait to see you at the concert hall and to share this music with you, also the Festive Overture and the First Symphony. So it's some of the coolest pieces and some of the brightest and most uplifting and electrifying pieces that Shostakovich has written. So we really look forward to seeing you there at the concert and to playing for you.
Thank you so much, Boris. It was so nice. So see you soon. Okay. Bye.